Ok, ja se nadam da možemo da počnemo sa našim večerašnjim panelom. Na samom početku želim da prenesem izvinjenje gospodina Ivana Vujačića koji je trebao da moderira panel, večerašnji panel, centralni panel. Nažalost, on se u međuvremenu razboleo i nije u situaciji da vodi panel, tako da ćete meni oprostiti s obzirom da nisam panel pripremao ako neku grešku u međuvremenu napravim, ali trudit ću se da dam sve od sebe da se ne primeti Ivanov izostanak. U svakom slučaju, svi zajedno Ivanu želimo da već koliko sutra bude sa nama. Na samom početku hoću da predstavim večerašnje goste, mada svi već vrlo dobro znate da su učesnici današnjeg panela i počet ću sa desne strane. Ambasador Italije, njegova ekscelencija Giuseppe Manzo, ambasador Austrije, njegova ekscelencija Johannes Aigner, ambasador Sjedinjenih Američkih Država i posebno želim dobrodošlicu na prvi Koponik Biznis Forum da izrazim, njegova ekscelencija Kyle Scott. Sa moje leve strane naš stalni gost, ambasador Michael Davenport, ambasador Evropske unije i takođe želim dobrodošlicu na prvi Koponik Biznis Forum ambasadoru Nemačke, gospodinu Axelu Dittmannu. No, gentlemen, we can start. I have introduced you and we are ready to start. First question, there will be two rounds of question and it was already agreed with the moderator. The first question will be designated to the EU topic, losing or finding its way. So in the last couple of years, we have seen the European Union facing one crisis after another, and basically not coming up with a lasting solution for any of them. First, there was the crisis of the Eurozone, which in July last year was handled in a very dramatic summit through extended another bailout package to Greece of 86 billion euros. IMF was very suspicious that with this bailout package could be resolved the Greek issue. So most probably Greek drama will continue and will bounce back perhaps under worse circumstances in the EU economy. Also, there still is no partial federalization of debt nor Eurozone-wide deposit insurance, which seem to be easily technically viable and would complete, along with the banking union that is being set up and the new role of the European Central Bank, new role of the Eurozone, and put it on a more sound footing. Secondly, there is the ongoing conflict with the Russian Federation over the crisis in the Ukraine that seems to be as far away from a solution as back when it started, except for the fact that there is much less bloodshed. Thirdly, the most acute issue is the migrant crisis of this year that has shown a lack of a common EU policy on such a vital issue, lack of solidarity on the European Union level, and total lack of capacity to address the war in Syria. Finally, there is the upcoming referendum in the UK on the British exit from the EU. In spite of the fact that everyone is talking about being satisfied with the deal, the results of the referendum could go either way. So my question for EU ambassadors, and I would ask Mr. Davenport to start, is what are the positions of your governments concerning, and EU, concerning these issues, and are there marked differences with other countries? How do you see the EU evolving loser confederation, closure confederation, or federation? No one is going to say break up, but is it possible? Mr. Davenport, take the floor, please.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for inviting me back. And I must say I'm impressed that so many people have actually turned out for a slot at 9:30 in the evening rather than sort of 10:30 in the morning.
Excuse me.
Sorry.
Ivan is bounced back like a Greek crisis, so I will ask him to take this floor and to leave me a bit. Oh, Ivan, yeah, I'm fine. Okay, very good.
Well, I missed last year. I wasn't going to miss this year, and so I'm back in the saddle. I hope you're happy with this. We just take out the discussion off. I'm okay. I went to see the doctor for a second, but things are working out. So let me not hold this up anymore. Pastor Davenport, please give us the view from Brussels. Tell us what happened today.
Well, welcome back.
Thank you.
I think the one thing I would say about this evening's session is that we're not very good on gender equality this year. Because we were doing better last year with Christine and Tanya, of course, as well. But anyway, something to think about for next time. But I think actually it's very good that you are wanting this time to focus not so much on where Serbia is on the EU path and the track to accession, but you're sort of turning it around and looking at what's going on more broadly, what's happening in the EU, what are the challenges that face the EU, what are the challenges that face us all, actually, the United States as well. So I think that's good. It was your introduction, but it wasn't you who gave it. You highlighted various particular challenges, including the geopolitical, the Eurozone, the migration crisis that we're all facing, the challenges to the sort of structures of the EU, the Brexit that Brexit poses. I would add, actually, a couple of other things. The challenges right now to the European Union when it comes to actually rule of law and fundamental rights and constitutional arrangements as well. And I think the rise of not just populist but also nationalist sentiment, and some rise in extremist sentiment around Europe too. I think all of these things present a big challenge to all of us, taken together with the sort of things that have been identified by a number of leaders over the years, the crisis when it comes to the competitiveness of European Union member states and the European Union as a whole, and the challenge of getting us to return to growth and creating jobs and tackling the recession, of course. I think when if you look at the points that you particularly raised, the Eurozone crisis and the financial crisis it's not solved. It's, I think, been a war has been waged against it, but it's certainly not solved. The origins are partly internal, partly structural, of course, within the Eurozone itself. It wasn't set up, in a sense, to deal with some of the challenges which it very, very soon had to face. But there were also external factors that perhaps also had not been, were not predicted. But I think, if you look at the way in which this has been tackled over a period of years, I mean, this presented an unprecedented challenge to the European Union and to European Union member states at a formative stage of the Eurozone. Major steps were taken, the European Stability Mechanism being established to tackle the crisis and to help economies which were in crisis. Also, you mentioned the banking proposals. Actually, I don't think the banking union proposal, I don't think these are dead. I don't think that the European Commission itself put forward a deposit insurance scheme in November. So that is now being discussed. It would be a phased approach to that, which are probably the only sort of approach that really makes sense. And maybe, we should also recognize that when it comes to the Eurozone, none of the Eurozone countries has actually been itching to leave the Eurozone. On the contrary, countries have sought to try to protect their position in the Eurozone. And even during this period of serious turbulence, new countries have adopted the euro, including Slovakia, then the three Baltic countries as well. And I mean, Europe doesn't have massive positive statistics to point to, but on the other hand, with the welter of bad news, the fact that the European countries actually as a whole, not just the Eurozone, but European Union countries, have returned to growth. The forecast for the year ahead is of just under 2% growth. The forecast for 2017 is of 2% growth. All the economies in the EU are expected to be expanding by next year. And in 2015, the economic output in all of the countries of the European Union either grew or at least remained stable. And I think there are some factors which are more positive when it comes to the future prospects for growth, when it comes to lower energy prices, lower oil prices. For example, also the more favorable financing conditions and more favorable exchange rate at the moment. Having said that, there are big clouds on the horizon. There's with the downturn in the Chinese economy, or at least the downturn in the rate of growth of the Chinese economy is presenting new challenges. And there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to the geopolitical factors around, as I think you've also pointed out. Migration crisis this is an unprecedented challenge for all of us, I think. I think we need to bear in mind that the migration crisis is a symptom of a wider problem, of a wider series of crises, rather than something which is standalone. And the source, the origin of the migration is outside the European Union and certainly results from factors way beyond the control of the European Union. Indeed, if we really want to tackle the medium and longer term issues, this will only be done by a comprehensive approach to the Middle East, which brings in our United States allies, it brings in other players, it brings in the Russians, it brings in all of the regional players. And I think there is an effort now underway to do that. And the European Union, of course, and individual member states will have a huge part to play in attempting what at the moment seems like the impossible. But it's our, I think, common duty to have a go at that. We're duty bound to do so. I think, you started with what happened yesterday, what happened today. There's been a massive effort by the European Union institutions, but also member states, to try to address this migration wave, which has presented huge challenges. I mean, we've had way over 1 million refugees streaming towards Europe, coming to Europe because they see Europe as a refuge, as a place where they can find a better life, stability, and where they can raise a family. Of course, at the same time, the reaction of European Union countries to this challenge has been, in some ways, has been very welcoming. Actually, the overall message last summer was one of sympathy and determination to tackle the humanitarian crisis, to help countries along the route, such as Serbia, with the humanitarian challenge that presented. But at the same time, I'm not sure if you can say that decisions were taken not to apply the national, European and international legislation on border control and asylum and so on, but that's actually what happened. And a decision was taken that by a number of governments that it was impossible in the face of this crisis to maintain the same level of border controls, to also to apply the asylum mechanisms. I think where we've got to now, sort of accelerating it with the decisions taken yesterday, although there was no final decision when it comes to the relationship with Turkey, I think many of the decisions taken yesterday are very important because it shows that there is now a determination to get back to applying those border controls more rigorously. There's a determination, therefore, to restore the Schengen Code. That's clear from the European Council conclusions. And there's also, I think, a much greater resolve coming out of the Council conclusions from yesterday, endorsed by all 28 member states, when it comes to supporting Greece, because Greece is inevitably facing the brunt of this issue. If I've got 1 second more, since Brexit was raised, I shouldn't shy away from saying something on that, I guess. Well, there is a deal, and the deal was no doubt hard fought, and there is a deal which the British Prime Minister is now presenting to the British public. I think this is the debate which is now taking place in my country, is a debate which is long overdue, because the referendum that took place in 1975, which I still remember, although I was only 13, and was very excited about at the time, is a long time ago, and most British citizens have not had the chance to actually vote on this issue. And of course, the European Union now is very different from the European Economic Community of 1970s. I will be going back to vote on the 23rd of June, and my children will have the first opportunity to vote in this. Indeed, one of them is campaigning not for Boris Johnson. This is important. It's a vital issue for Britain, and I like to think it's actually quite an important issue also for the rest of the European Union. I think that Britain stands to benefit hugely from being a full part of the European, full member of the European Union, and I think that Britain also has a lot to contribute. So I'm optimistic that this will go the right way.
Well, you really have your job cut out for you to explain all these things. I'm so sure you're getting questioned on this all the time. The whole crisis has also shown another thing. It's shown that Europe is really not united in a lot of things, and that there's open feuds about the whole migration crisis. And it's not for nothing that Fred Hyatt in the Washington Post last week, he wrote a column, and the title of the column was Europe is falling apart while America's clowning around. Okay? So we'll get back to the United States in a little while. But the falling apart part is something that I think a lot of people are really taking seriously, and an issue that needs to be addressed. And Ambassador Eigner, you're on this route. I'm sorry, I think from what I hear, this is your last time here. Is that true? Are you leaving? Oh, good. Well, we'll all hope we'll be back. So there's been some disputes on how Austria is closing her border. There's some disputes with Germany, from what I gathered a few weeks ago. Things were going back and forth. There's been disagreements on that issue. Can you tell us something about the Austrian position? Because we're very affected here by the Austrian position, because this is the whole route that goes all the way through Croatia and Serbia.
Thank you, and good evening. Yes, I'm glad to be here for the fourth time, and with a bit of chance, I might come back last year, extending my mandate for another one or 2 years. Perhaps I should start with because of the debt crisis and the migration crisis. It turned out that dealing with fiscal deficits and sovereign debts is easier than to deal with the surplus of human beings. You can find technocratic solutions. They are not perfect, and a lot remains to do, as Michael said. but results are already clear. Portugal, Ireland, already for some time left the rescue scheme. Cyprus, I think, is now about to leave the rescue scheme. So really, positive results have been achieved while dealing with the debt crisis. It's much more difficult when you have to deal with human beings, it turned out, because also the population and people in Austria is immediately concerned. They are only, at least in a direct perception, marginally concerned by a debt crisis. They're immediately concerned by an influx of migrants and refugees, by an irregular influx. Austria did actually not close its borders. It reintroduced, as quite some other member states in the European Union, border control. And some weeks ago it decided to introduce quotas, 35,800 people a year, having in mind that last year Austria, close to 90,000 people asked for asylum in Austria, not only formally, but they intended to stay in Austria. So because there's a difference, people tend to apply for asylum in other countries, but with the aim to move to another country. Those 90,000 who applied in Austria have the intention to stay in Austria. And there was, after some internal discussions, also between coalition partners in Austria, the conclusion that Austria cannot shoulder this burden or another 90,000 arriving this year, therefore the introduction of yearly quotas and eventually daily quotas, and with the focus on strengthening external border controls. By the way, I just seen now that Slovenia, they now really closed the border and decided to let in only people with passport and valid visa. So this is the next step taken by our neighbor, and which indeed might affect Croatia, Serbia, and other countries on the Balkan route. But coming back to the European Turkey summit, I think some important elements have been laid down, not yet fully agreed, but I think at least a way is shown how to turn the irregular flow of migrants and refugees to a regular and regulated flow of refugees, to reduce migration to those people who are entitled to refugee status, and to clear that status, not in Greece, not in Serbia, not in Slovenia, not in Austria, not in Germany, but back in Turkey, from where most of the migrants, refugees are originating.
Okay, Ambassador Manso, Italy has been suffering this for a while before other people noticed with this whole migration across the Mediterranean Sea, and especially from Libya, and Italy's been living with this for a long time, and it seems that until it affects the a bigger number of countries in Europe, it sort of was a little neglected. Or do you feel your experience and your role in this whole dealing with migrants that has been there for years is something that maybe you should comment on? There's also the comment that Prime Minister Renzi made on how some of the Eastern European countries should show solidarity, and that they were ready to take the funds for accession and all this while the going was good, but now that they're refusing some of this, that maybe the EU should reconsider whether they should be funded for some of their projects and things of that nature. Maybe you could comment on some of that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think you put together two interesting things that perhaps they are really, in a way, related. But let me first thank you for having me here, and let me thank you, because I didn't know I have so many friends here in Serbia to attend the meeting at 10 o'clock about foreign issues. So I think it counts if you stay. It doesn't count if you leave. You can text, you can tweet, you can either sleep for a while, but you cannot leave, okay? So that's the ground rules. But we are we way past the moment where we kept saying, we said it, we warned you, we said that this is not something that one country can shoulder. So Austria is saying the same. So it's past that. Serbia, who is not an EU member state, said it. Serbia asked for a common European policy on this. So that should tell us something about the job we need to do, and that relates to all the things that you raised during the introduction, your introduction, but by Atsa. It's about, I would rather put it a different way. It's not about either finding its way or losing its way, but working on a new way to tackle, to answer, as Michael was saying, new and unprecedented challenges. The very question here is not if we will overcome as Europe these issues. And by the way, thank you, Madam Deputy Prime Minister, for being among us tonight. It shows great solidarity. But it's the question is if we will be able to do it without bending, denying or sacrificing the values that are the base of Europe. That's the real question. It's not about if we will manage to. We have to manage through upholding those values that are the same values Serbia that constitutes the kind of life, social model, whatever you want to put it, however you want to put it, that Serbia, a country which wants to join you, look forward to and making sacrifices to achieve. In a way, it's the same life, kind of life that refugees, as Michael said, fleeing from war zones are searching for. So the paradox here is that it's us, the European Union citizens, us, who've been experiencing for 60 years, great achievements. Common market, Euro, Schengen. So it's us who are becoming less and less aware of what we have accomplished, and less perhaps confident in the fact that Europe still is the best answer to our questions. And I'm not talking about big political international issues like Ukraine or Syria. I'm talking about addressing needs close to the citizen, to real citizens. So, and that brings me back to the values of searching for peace, prosperity, assuring my children a better life than I had. As Michael again mentioned that's something that we need to recover, because this is something that, and you mentioned what my Prime Minister said. He's right. We need to focus again on this. My Minister of Foreign Affairs gathered in Rome the 6 founding members of the European Union last month, exactly for this. It's a wake-up call. Guys, we need to reaffirm that these values are still valid. Otherwise, why are we here? Why are we even here? So that's something that I think need to be addressed. And I want to be a bit farther than this because I think that we need, Europe is made of Italy once, banking union, political union, fiscal union, and UK who is asking for only a more functioning common market. That's okay. We have to make sure these different levels of integration are compatible. They must be compatible. And that's our challenge ahead of us, because that's In this, again, since we are talking here in Serbia, in this I think also the enlargement process, rather, I wouldn't focus on the process side, but on the enlargement as an idea can play a role. Because, again, it's different, on a different level, countries like Serbia, but Albania and others can contribute on issues, even from different positions, on this to create this common project. And migration, you mentioned that. It's just one clear example of this. And of course, I'm not talking, it's easy to talk about the generosity of Serbian people and solidarity shown toward these hundreds of thousands of people coming through. I'm mentioning the fact that Serbia was among the ones who asked and called for a European Union approach, while there were others in Europe, like member states, who were not. So this is the proof that Europe can work at different levels and still be the answer.
Well, now let's talk to let's see what Ambassador Dittmann has to say about this, because a lot of people here and a lot of people in the world are seeing like Germany was one of the or the most important, quote-unquote, country in the sense of the largest economy, the expansion that has been going on over the years where there wasn't a problem, looking to Germany for leadership. And it seems to me that from what we've seen is that first there was this policy of everybody's welcome, and then things started shaking in terms of political support, especially from the CSU in Bavaria and part of the CDU. And then things have been changing, and then things have been trying to, Chancellor Merkel has tried to get the other European states to work together on this, and this has seemed to be a long, drawn-out and difficult process, and finally coming to the summit today on this whole migration crisis. So maybe you could enlighten us on the German position and how you see things have been evolved in Germany and how you see this whole thing play out.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me to this panel. I'm very happy to be here at this advanced hour, and also grateful, like the others, that you managed, all of you, to be here with us. On the general question of the different challenges to the EU, I think it's easy then always to see the EU in a crisis mode. But I think if you look at the challenges we are facing right now, I mean, they're really enormous. I mean, there was first the Euro crisis, was a very big crisis. Now we have the refugee thing, and that is something which is as also my colleague said, really very big challenges where there is no quick answer. And the EU is a special organization where 28 member states, ceded sovereignty, and we have complex decision-making procedures. So it takes time. It's out in the open, but I wouldn't say we are losing it. But I think we are in the process of finding the way. Germany, of course, plays an important role there. But if you look at the challenges, and as Giuseppe was saying, I mean, they are so big, we can only solve them within the framework of the European Union. So no member state alone could do it. Yeah? So we are striving as Germany to contribute to finding common positions. So if I may say on two of the subjects which we discussed here, on the monetary union thing, and Michael said a few of those issues, I believe that it was really a very difficult issue, but that we managed together to make very important issues, very important structural decisions, which are extremely far-reaching. And yes, we have no debt mutualization, and we believe it would be the wrong approach. But we have had enormous decisions, which is the ESM, the banking union, the six-pack, the fiscal compact. I mean, where we had all 28 member states had to adopt their constitutions. I mean, this is a really massive things. And last year, then the decision, a third package for Greece, where I believe that we have depicted a way where we can really address the issue. It's still ongoing. It's tough. But also, as Johannes was saying, if you look at how the euro crisis has evolved, we had a number of eurozone countries who had rescue programs, and they have all managed to get out. Cyprus will be the last one too, and then we'll only have Greece inside. So I think this is really something where the EU, in its slow-moving process, has taken very far-reaching decisions, and they're working. Now, on the refugee thing. This is, of course, a very, very big challenge. It's a challenge also here in Serbia, and it affects all of us very much. And I think that we, the German government, we have consistently argued and worked hard to bring about a joint European solution to this. And if you look at the EU-Turkey action plan of 29 November of last year, I mean, it's really something where we consistently, together with partners, are working on. I think that in the last European Council in February already, there was a big consensus on steps to take. And now, in the meeting yesterday, I think this is something which we still have to finalize. It's still important work to be done until we, the heads of state and government will meet again next week. But we have now, in our view, made some really important progress, which could make a qualitative change, really, as Michael was saying, it's about protecting our external border, coming back to really enforcing Schengen. And yesterday with Turkey, I believe we made a very important agreement which could lead to really stopping the illegal migration flow into the European Union. And this will be something which we'll have to work hard in the next week, but it's something which is, I would say, consistent. It brings about a European solution. It's not a solution which is at the detriment of one member state, Greece, which of course is something where we also agreed on solidarity measures. And now we have to make it work. So these are examples for extremely tough challenges where with difficult processes, I think we are working to bring about a common European solutions. One word on Brexit.
Yeah.
We also welcome what we agreed on in February. We believe it's a good deal, which is hopefully which the UK government subscribed to, which we believe preserves the acquis, which is of course crucial. And now it is up to the UK voters to cast the ballots, and your kids hopefully will then tip it into the right direction. And now we have to wait.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Well, last but certainly not least, we'll hear from the Ambassador of the United States. It's first time here. Welcome, Ambassador Scott. We're glad you could make it quickly after your arrival. What I would like to ask you is, how do you see obviously, the United States is the superpower in the world, and what do you see are the major challenges for the United States, and what do you see in terms of its relations with Europe? Because a lot of talk and a lot of ink has been spilled on the contending that the United States is focusing on Asia as a pivot to the Pacific. It does the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership that is up in Congress to be signed on a major free trade area, regional trade area, and that somehow, Europe was something that the United States didn't pay attention to until, say, the Eurozone crisis happened. When the Eurozone crisis happened, Tim Geithner, who was Secretary of the Treasury, went over to talk to the ministers in Europe, in the EU. Basically, they told them, look, you made this mess, don't tell us what to do. Then President Obama wrote a letter to Chancellor Merkel in 2010 talking about, solving the Eurozone in the sense of fiscal expansion stimulus and all this stuff, and he got a letter back from her and Schäuble, Minister Schäuble, saying, in effect, forget it, this is the period of austerity and consolidation. We have to do this in the sense that, we'll handle this on our own. But I don't want you just to focus on Europe. I just want to see what you line of thinking. What does the U.S. government see as the major challenges that facing it in the world in the next year? Some can be acute, some can be long-term. Whatever you think is important.
Okay, thank you first for that series of questions. I'm not sure exactly what to do with all of them, and thank you for the invitation to join you all here at Koponik. Let me start actually taking a step back and talk about Europe for a little bit, and then I'll talk about the broader pictures. It may come as an irony to some, but the United States has probably been the strongest supporter of European integration of any country in the world, including a lot of the countries in Europe. We believe that the strength of this process is helping to build a stronger, more prosperous, and therefore better partner for the United States in the world. So when we look at the Monet method and its slow addition of additional competencies over time, I think we have to look at what exactly has been achieved. The European Union and its integration process in Europe has transformed this continent and has transformed this continent for the better, and we very much welcome that. Moving from the European coal and steel community to the European Common Market, to the European Union, adding the euro, adding the Schengen areas, all of these steps have helped to change the way Europe is today. And I think that, and I think Beppe was very right about this, I think that it's probably human nature to underestimate what you have right now. But if you stop and think about all the things that have happened in Europe, if they, in fact, the European Union were to disintegrate, if those things were to go away, if you were to take a trip from Ljubljana to Lisbon tomorrow in this new post-apocalyptic world, you'd be going back to crossing borders, stopping every time you did it, changing your currency every time. Your children would not be able to study elsewhere through the Erasmus program. All of the things which have helped to bring Europe together, helped to make Europe more prosperous, but also helped to make Europe the best partner possible for the United States would begin to unravel. And that's why what's been going on is certainly a concern for my country. It's something that we've watched very closely for all of the efforts, and I do believe a lot of efforts have taken place. I think that most Americans would say regarding the Eurozone crisis that the European reaction was perhaps a little bit too incremental, a little bit too timid. Certainly if you compare it to what happened in my own country as we faced our own crisis in 2008, 2009, some of the steps taken by the United States government were totally unprecedented for the time. Essentially government taking over control of major corporations for a while, making steps that would have been unimaginable 6 months earlier. And yet it helped to turn around our economy so much faster so that we have now a situation where the United States has had several years of uninterrupted growth, of not the strongest growth, not what we would really like, but still very solid growth. The United States economy has been adding somewhere between 175,000 and 200,000 new jobs every month consistently for the last several years. And all of that was because of bold steps taken and bold leadership and not incremental lowest common denominator decisions. And I think that that's a bit of the structural problem that still remains in the European Union, is that it's forced to take decisions through this consensus building mechanism, which is not as bold perhaps as it is. And a second element of that, if I can just add to it, is the Eurozone crisis. I think that we have gotten over the worst of the Eurozone crisis, but the real essence of the Eurozone crisis is not about the financial stability of various different countries or the banking system. It's about the lack of growth in Europe, the lack of a significant growth path that will help to create the jobs for the future generations of Europeans. And that's something I think that Europe needs to continue to struggle with. And you see it also in the countries neighboring on Europe, who depend so much upon the European market. So that was a lot of talk about Europe before I get to your question, which is more about the United States. Regarding the United States, I think the big challenges out there, first and foremost, is to continue on the path of growth that we've been on. It's kind of a joke about the American political system that it's the economy, stupid. You have to focus on the economy, but that's really what it is all about. It's about providing a standard of living to your population and a future for the young people who are coming of age that are so important. And I think that we've got to continue to struggle on that path. The American growth rate, while it has been somewhere around 3% on average for several years now, it has not provided the number of high-quality jobs that the middle class would have liked to see. And people still feel an economic insecurity, so we need to focus on growth and the depth of our economic growth. A second thing, I think we're in an election year, and we have to focus on a smooth transition to whatever will come with the next administration, ensuring that policies are maintained, move forward for the benefit of our people. And finally, I think we need to look at the larger international scene and the key security threats that we face, but also our allies face. And here I would say certainly a resurgent Russia fits in that category. The rise of extreme ideologies in various different parts of the world, the growth of international terrorism, the interlinkages of international terrorism, and finding ways that we can both maintain our democratic systems but also adjust to these extremist ideologies will be some of the key challenges that we'll be facing over the next decade.
Yeah, well,
I'm sorry, can I add one more thing?
Sure,
Since
of
you did
course.
ask
I was
me,
going to ask you something else.
You asked me
Go
about
ahead.
Trans-Pacific Partnership,
Yeah.
the so-called pivot to Asia, which is now formally called the rebalancing with Asia. Here, you have to understand some of the realities. The United States is a nation which looks both on the Atlantic and on the Pacific. And with the rapid growth of countries of Asia, the countries on our Pacific side now, in fact, represent about 60% of our international trade. So liberalizing those partnerships are a key element of this growth strategy that I talked about. That doesn't mean that we're ignoring the European side, quite the opposite. We've been acting and moving forward with TTIP at the same time that we were moving forward with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The only regrettable factor is, in fact, that the negotiations there have been a little bit slower and become bogged down. But I would be very happy to welcome not only the ratification of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but a similar move to agree upon and then ratify TTIP here with our European partners.
Yeah, good. Well, let me ask you this, though. You mentioned growth and how the middle class is getting disaffected with the idea that their children will not live better than they have. And this is sort of becoming a thing in Europe and in the United States, at least when you look at the polls, a lot of people are saying that. And this brings us to our second theme, and I will have the ambassadors in the reverse order. The ones who spoke last will spoke first on a theme that I think has to do with internal politics, which is something that ambassadors don't really like to talk about. But certainly we need to consider the looming danger of populism in Europe, of dissatisfaction, of anger. There was a poem written by William Butler Yeats called The Second Coming a long time ago, and it was saying things like anarchy is everywhere the center cannot hold. And the center is holding just barely in a lot of places, it seems to me, or it's somehow holding, but there's a danger of a resurgent populism because of deep ingrained dissatisfaction. And one of the things that we're seeing, for example, now is obviously the Donald Trump and his accession to the his accession maybe to for candidate for the United States president, and we're seeing a lot of anger, voicing a lot of things that have not been heard since the days of George Wallace, who was a prominent Alabama governor and racist back in the 70s. And somehow it seems to me that this has also taken America by surprise. A lot of people are really surprised this when you look at the papers. They're worried. The Republican establishment is worrying about it, and the other people are concerned that this is getting out of hand and that it's leading America down a road that it doesn't really want to take. A lot of people don't want it to go that way. So maybe we can discuss something that has to do also with is happening in Europe. And I will ask the ambassadors of European countries to sort of give their view and how this can be handled, how institutions are coming under the attack of this anti-establishment, if I can put it that way, reaction by a whole mass of people within countries that have long democratic traditions, that have long-lasting institutions that are democratic, etc. So maybe you can start, Mr. Minister.
Well, you started with the right point, which is ambassadors are very uncomfortable talking about the internal politics of their country. I would even go a step further. You know, there's an American law which states that, in fact, I would violate the law if I get involved in partisan politics in any way or form. But I think I can at least try to explain what I think is the mood in my country and how that's playing out. And you see it definitely playing out in the campaign right now. There is a mood of dissatisfaction, I think, among a large segment of the American population. And it comes from this basic idea that you mentioned, that many kind of middle-class Americans do not believe that their children will live better than they did. And that's kind of a change from what we've seen in the past. There has always been a mobility in the American society, lower classes coming up and some people drifting back down. But the idea that the average person in the middle class would live better than their parents' generation was pretty standard, essentially since World War II. And I think that the economic crisis of 2008, 2009, the other kind of adjustments to a more modern economy, the decline in manufacturing as an element of our economy, although we have seen a certain growth in the last couple of years, have led people to think that those quality jobs are becoming fewer and far between, and that they worry about the future of their children. So you see this kind of ugly mood, or more a mood of concern and almost fear among certain people, and then politicians playing on fears, playing on concerns. There's an anti-establishment mood throughout the electorate, and Donald Trump, I think, in particular, has tapped into that. So you see people coming out to vote in the Republican primaries who never voted in the past. So he has ignited a flame among a certain group of the populace that obviously was there to be exploited by a politician. So this populism, I think, is definitely playing well among the electorate right now. And there's also a certain almost joy among the older, white, lower middle class that political correctness is being turned on its head. That for too long they've been told they can't think the thoughts that they think, and here it is, Donald Trump is in fact saying and speaking out for their views as well. And he's gained a lot of popularity as a result of that. You've seen a backlash within the Republican Party in the last couple of weeks, the establishment going after it and saying that some of the elements of Trump's policy go beyond what they think is electable. And that's the major concern among Republicans, is that Donald Trump will win the candidacy, but then in going up against the Democratic candidate will fail miserably because he doesn't reflect a broad enough view of the American populace. The only way we'll ever be able to tell whether that's correct or not is to go to elections if Donald Trump, in fact, wins the candidacy from the Republican Party, and we'll just have to wait and see on that. But there is a mood that I think most analysts of American politics have been caught by surprise by what's going on both the Republican and the Democratic side, because you have to look also at the Democratic side. We thought that we had one kind of mainstream candidate who everybody knew, and then Bernie Sanders, who is a self-described socialist, which in American politics is almost a taboo word, fighting a very difficult fight against Hillary Clinton, doing quite well, especially among the youth of the United States who support the Democratic Party, so that on both sides, standard political calculations have kind of been turned on their ear. And I think it reflects a larger mood that's going on. And we'll just have to see how the campaign and the electoral process plays out to see if, in fact, these candidates have tapped into a mood that the general analysts didn't think, in fact, existed.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, you stayed out of trouble. You managed to stay out of trouble. That's good.
Appreciate it.
Ambassador Dittman, what about in Germany? What do you see? Do you see this? There was this ugly incident with the immigrants in New Year's, and there's been a backlash and there's been certain movements that have becoming very anti-immigrant, which is understandable up to a point because this is sort of changing the way everyday life of certain people in various cities in Germany. But do you see this as a danger? Do you see, how do you see the politics of this whole European crisis playing out in terms of potential populist movements?
Well, I mean, we obviously have the issue of populism in Europe. It is there. Now, the question is, where does it come from and how to address it? And I think with in the first round, what we spoke about these challenges in the Eurozone, globalization in general, I mean, this makes people then also afraid, and then it is easy for political forces to offer at first instant perception an easy answer. You retreat to the national, you kind of shut out the wider world, and but the problem is it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Globalization is a fact. It comes to you, and if you look at the example or the experience we had with the Euro crisis, I think also in Germany there was like a lot of support for populist tendencies. But once it became kind of apparent that there was a plan within the EU, be it incremental, but there was some big decisions and the situation was under control, then also this was translated also in loss of support for this. So I think the only thing we can do is there's no quick answer. It's a fact. You have to solve the problems. If you solve the problems, you will get back the support, the confidence of the people, and I think that is what you have to do. I think it's also important that we kind of emphasize that globalization is something which might scare people, but it's also huge opportunities. Kyle was speaking about TTIP. I think TTIP would be a global trading area of 800 million people with half of global GNP, 2/3 of foreign direct investment worldwide. I mean, this is something which is such a potential win-win situation where we can increase our wealth and also together shape globalization. I mean, otherwise other people will shape it for us, and so there is really no way around than addressing the issues together for us in the European Union, to provide answers to the problems and then to try to convince the people. And this is a process which takes time. It's not something where you have like a quick fix. And I think we spoke about the refugee crisis. It's the same. Some people said, let's just try to solve it quickly, but it is an issue which has a huge dimension, and it takes some time. And I think in the European Union we have done a few things which are not so bad. If you look also at the climate discussions, for example. So there is the possibility to address the issues.
Yeah, but let me follow up on this one. Just a short question. I had the impression that Chancellor Merkel was a little surprised by the reaction of some of the Eastern European countries because, after all, okay, it's a big deal. There's 1 million people that came into Europe last year, at least. But the European Union has 500 million people. And all of a sudden, this turned out to be a problem, and that others were refusing based on populist politics. We don't want this, we don't want Muslims, we don't want that. This probably didn't go down well with the German government, I would assume. So maybe you can expand a little on that.
Well, you will understand, I don't want to comment now developments in individual other EU countries. Just to say that I think we share your view. I mean, we are 500 million people, and the European Union is able to play a role in the refugee crisis. we also believe that we do have as Europe a responsibility or something that not for the crisis in Syria, but to also to address the crisis and to help the people in need. And now we're working to get together this joint European approach.
Okay, good, thank you. Mr. Manso, you've had your own share of populist politics in Italy. But now you seem to have a government that's very committed and very European and doing a lot of reform, structural reform. So maybe you can tell us something about what is going internally in Italy in terms of the general mood concerning this whole crisis of the European Union.
Thank you. Thank you for helping doing my job, like selling my country and my country's reforms and how European we are. But that is true. Of course, we're going through also, we are witnessing populistic movements, but mainstream Italy is pro-European and actually is pro, let's say, an enhanced vision of European Union. I would say that Prime Minister Renzi definitely brought this new energetic approach to the way we see at the future of Europe. And I'd like to borrow the timid definition that Kyle used to say, you being too timid, and he's right. You're totally right. And it's connected with populism and nationalism and all isms that are against Europeism. When I was mentioning before the values, and things that are close to citizens, that's what I meant. I meant if Europe is not able to show that still has the ability to address jobs, growth, education, that will help that kind of narrative about Europe, and that would definitely strengthen those who are weakening this project, the idea of strengthening Europe, and those who want EU citizens to believe that their interests are best served by going alone rather than going united. But this is, this is in theory. If we do believe this, if we do believe that this is the case, that we have to fight this populism and we have to believe in the future of Europe, a stronger Europe to address real needs of people, we have to be coherent. We don't have to be timid, as Kyle said. We have to be a bit more ambitious. We have to be, not to be scared of taking the next steps. And because otherwise we can enjoy talking, even if it is 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock, about the values, but then we need to really talk about what's needed and not being scared of taking the next steps. So I just wrote down a couple of things that we should be thinking and working to really to achieve. We're talking about the stability mechanisms. All of these issues that, these devices that have been put together to help countries who are in difficult situation through the financial crisis. Okay, so the idea is to turn this ESM into a European Monetary Fund. Or even thinking of working on a perspective to have a finance minister of the European Union. I know it's ambitious, but that's what we have to talk about in order to move things ahead. We have to talk about sharing financial risks. I know that this mutual approach is something very, very sensible for many countries, but we have to talk about this thing. We have to address it, because otherwise we just giving the opportunity to people who want to use fear, want to use people, again, fear about the future against Europe. And again, let me stress this. We have to find new tools, new ways, but not changing the values. I'd like to say, on a personal note, something that perhaps you can appreciate. We talked about recently. I served many years in the U.S., and I was there, you were ambassador there, through a time where the U.S. was challenged, and faced with very unprecedented threat and attacks. And they had to respond to this. I witnessed there many voices advocating for, taking an approach that would bend, change, compromise values. Sometimes they did it, succeeding in advocating for that. But at the end, the way I see it, when the U.S., it's an ongoing process, when the U.S. accomplished missions only when it stood by the values that were the founding. We should we should learn that lessons there. And that is something that we should use as a memento for us. So I think this would help us to face this populism, nationalism, to stand by, our principles. Otherwise, it's a lost battle.
Thank you. Ambassador Eigner, you have things to, I'm sure you have things to add to this discussion. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, there clearly is a surge of nationalistic and populistic temptation around Europe, in our neighborhood, and certainly Austria is not free from that temptation. There are many reasons. One reason certainly is, and Edwin Kill mentioned it, is the dwindling of the middle class, or a middle class which is no longer as confident in the future or as self-confident as it used to be. One reason perhaps is a increasing income gap, which is difficult to deal with, but which certainly would call for a perhaps new conception. You can't get back to social policies of the rich 80s, 90s, let's put it that way, but to reinvent a social policy which would again guarantee a reasonable level of social equality. It's difficult to reinvent it, but I think one will have to think in that direction, because there's also a double challenge. Is the on the one hand, the demographic decline. People now in their 30s, they are not sure what pension system will they have to live with. On the other hand, there's the industrial revolution, the fourth revolution, which will make superfluous a lot of traditional labor force, not only in the production, but also in services. So the typical middle-class jobs in banks, for instance. In Austria, for an example, where a bank is going to close a whole lot of subsidiaries, because there is a definite transit to internet banking. We know that all. So that means losses of traditional jobs for middle class. And a second point, apart from social policy, is certainly education. You said we tend to forget, and Pepe said what European Union meant in historic terms, in historic dimensions. I think still also in Austria and in Austrian schools, pupils are not made enough aware of these achievements. And if I dare, would also recommend in Serbia to introduce that kind of education as of now, even if accession is some time ahead. So to really make young people aware of what this continent, after all, has brought about in the last decade.
Thank you. Well, we again turn to Ambassador Davenport, the highest common denominator present here, and maybe he can give us a few thoughts on this, and then we'll see if there's any questions in the audience very quickly. Please, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm glad you avoided calling me the lowest commentator on this.
Of course, naturally, I wouldn't do that.
I think it's interesting that, thank you, Kyle, because, it's interesting that in a way it takes an American US ambassador, maybe somebody who knows Europe as well as you do and knows, the European institutions as well as you do, to remind us, quite forcefully of what the European Union has achieved over a period of time. Actually, I think the same is happening right now in my own country, because I think the debate that is taking place, which is a very vivid debate, and it's certainly, the outcome can't be taken for granted, it's forcing people to remember why it is and what the arguments are, what it is that the European Union has achieved, and what actually you stand to lose if you no longer end up being part of that. But at the same time, I think that we do need to recognize, as Axel said, I think, that there is disaffection, there is disenchantment with, it's not just disenchantment with the European institutions and the lack, perhaps, of accountability, democratic accountability still, of many of the European institutions. It's also disaffection at the national level and at other levels. And that, of course, is fueled at a time of economic crisis and very significantly high unemployment across many of the European Union countries. Still, despite what I was saying about creeping out of recession, you have to recognize that although unemployment is coming down, it's coming down only slowly and from very high levels. We need, I think, to be working much harder to ensure that the European Union, the institutions and national governments are listening to what those concerns are and engaging in the things that are really important to make the things happen that we need to see. And as Carl again reminded us, about the United States, growth and jobs are key. It's the same in Europe. We need to find a way of Europe becoming much more competitive, creating the energy union, which is not there yet, but is fundamental to proper functioning of the European-wide economy. We need to do this at all levels. And it's interesting when I think of when I was in my last job, when I was still British, as I say, in my last job, and I was defending here and promoting the platform which Prime Minister Cameron launched at the beginning of 2013. It wasn't just about these 4 areas which ended up being part of the Brexit deal. It was about a much wider set of reforms of the European Union, and that included significant steps on competitiveness, significant steps on removing red tape in the European institutions, but also the energy union. The interesting thing is that what has happened since the new Commission came in under Juncker in 2014 is that many of these things are precisely the platform that Juncker came into office on. And you don't hear a lot of praise from anybody in London for the European Commission very often. But when the Prime Minister came back from the European Council in February, it was interesting that the arguments about the European Union were not just concerning those 4 areas. It was also that the European Union is moving forward on key areas, and deepening the single market is key to that, making the single market truly relevant to the modern economy, including all the aspects of the IT industry. And that's where, of course, it's also very relevant here. Just finally, I'd like to just say one thing, if I may, about enlargement, which is not supposed to be our topic, but it is a European Union policy. I think it's important to register that. It's a European Union policy. It's endorsed by all 28 member states. You were saying there's not many things that we can agree on. Actually, the thing is that the discussion always tends to focus, of course, naturally, on things that are controversial, but all 28 member states agree that enlargement is right, is necessary. It's necessary for the European Union, it's necessary for the region here as part, which is seen as part of Europe. And that's the mandate that we have here, is to support Serbia. That's why I was pleased to hear the Prime Minister saying what he said this morning about, as you head for elections, that the European Union path is the one that he believes is for Serbia. So that's encouraging.
Well, thank you very much. Do we have time left or not? Or we are overdue? Maybe we'll just take maybe 2 questions. How's that? So identify yourself, sir.
Come?
Even in 2016, no common European dream, but we are still having 20-plus national dreams.
Who wants to take that? Ambassador Davenport?
Well, of course there are 28 national dreams. I don't think, and there will be more, because when Serbia joins, you'll have your national dream, and nationally. And I don't think that it is either realistic or desirable to get away from the national agendas and the vision for Serbia doing well and Germany doing well and so on. But I think there's very much a European. I mean, I'm a committed European, and I do believe that there is a strong, not just an argument for a more coherently functioning Europe, a united Europe, which can be stronger, as Kyle was saying, a stronger partner for allies on the world stage, and which can defend by becoming stronger, also developing a stronger economy, can be stronger and look after the interests of its citizens more effectively. I don't believe that individual countries can, as Axel said, I don't believe individual countries can deal with the massive challenges and the massive problems that we face in today's world, whether it's climate change, whether it's energy security, whether it's geopolitical issues, whether it's the question of competitiveness, because we have to measure ourselves in our competitiveness against the whole of the rest of the world, and the challenge there is getting much, much tougher. So yes, I do think that, I don't think there's a contradiction there, but of course we look with a little bit of envy, I suppose. Kyle was saying, they can react they've dealt with much more speedily with the economic challenges, moved to take swift and bold decisions. The European Union struggles with that, because the European Union is, and I think this is a phrase from Only Fools and Horses, it's a work in progress. It's not there yet. We shouldn't imagine that the European Union has reached any sort of settled state. It's expanding, and it should expand, it should enlarge, it should meet the aspirations of countries that, European countries that want to join it and want to meet the criteria and sign up to the values of the European Union. But it must also be ready to change. The institutions must be ready to change, whether it's the Commission or the Parliament, but also must be ready to become much more effective and answer citizens' needs, businesses' needs, far more effectively and directly. I think these are the big challenges, to show the way forward.
Okay. One more question, and that's it, and we'll wrap up. Anybody? No questions? Okay. If there aren't any questions, let me end with the following note. Back in 1994, I was at the Salzburg seminar, and the theme of the Salzburg seminar was, "Is Europe losing its way?" And there was a gloom and doom, and there were a lot of middle career people and various important people there for a week discussing this, and I was happy to be part of that. And then, you know, I came out of that, and then 10 years later, if you think about it, the European Union not only has not lost its way, it had 10 more members in 2004, it had growth, it had achieved the euro zone, it had done all kinds of things that nobody thought in 1994 would have been possible, and that there would be a long struggle to get things done. So with that little optimistic thought, I'd like to thank all of you. I hope, Ambassador Eigner, you're here next year, and I hope next year we'll discuss the results of meeting the challenges that have been faced. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well done.